So without further ado, we have Neill Riordan. He's a head of F&O KPMG, and he's going to share expert knowledge and experience about retail. So I will let Neill to introduce himself. Thank you, Neill. Over to you.
No, thank you very much, and hello everybody, and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. Yep, so as mentioned, I work for KPMG in the UK, but I've been doing retail projects for a number of years now over different worlds, really. So from department stores to jewelry chains. So hopefully what I'm going to go through this session is just basically cover off some core concepts around commerce, and then some of the key decision areas that we always find challenged during delivery. You've had some great sessions this morning and this afternoon about the technology, and so we're just going to come with a delivery focus on this one and what we need to start asking the clients to do, and if there are any clients or potential customers of Dynamics on the call, just really have a good think about this in preparation for kicking off your program. So I think the first thing I just wanted to make sure is everybody, we can align on a few things. So we have some core concepts within commerce. The category hierarchies is probably the biggest thing. So importantly, this is an organization of all the products, but really important, it's a global collection. So where we have lots of great functionality around the legal entity, this is not. This is everything that your organization, be it an umbrella organization with lots of disparate business units within inside it, sells, or be it you are a multinational company selling your products across the globe. There has to be some good thinking around this, and I'll come on to that in a second. Assortments are basically how are we bringing these products together for the channels that we're going to sell them in. And then the catalogues, so you can think of this as in two lines. So we either have the old school catalogue scenario where a book would pass through your mailbox, or we have a catalogue that we want to have for our online store and maybe part of the clienteling experience potentially. So just moving on to the category hierarchy then. So for those exposed to Contoso and things like that, the one on the image on the right hand side should be quite familiar to you. It's taken from the Contoso build, and importantly, it just kind of shows diversity in the thinking that has to go through this piece. So if we have a scenario where we have fashion brands within one legal entity, potentially another legal entity selling a different type of product, we have to think about that at point A. We really have to understand how all of these companies will come together, as well as potentially growth patterns for the future of that organization. Now, why this becomes so important? Well, it really helps you when you set up a product, because there are a lot of default values that can come from assigning a product into one of these nodes. Now, I've worked on programs where this didn't work for them, so they needed to go by a departmental break because they were a department store, and that's, as we went through all the processes of determination which approach, they thought that was the best way to go for them. The only problem is with that approach, you now lose all the ability to default certain values into those products when you join them, which makes product creation a lot harder. So there really does have to be some good thinking down around here. The other thing, just at the bottom there, you can never have the same name in this list. So if you see, for example, you have a fashion scenario and you have a top, and then you have apparel and footwear in maybe a different selling organization, which is part of your Dynamics implementation, you both can't have the word top. So consider prefixing with a number so that you can actually handle that more effectively. So that's just one thing to think about. What is an assortment? Well, An assortment just basically allows us to bring the products together. So in this example, we have a shoes and a jacket belonging to the base assortment, which is provided to all of the stores. But once again, the whole piece around this is global. So an assortment for my fashion retailer base will be very different from my assortment from my I don't know, kind of sports and equipment legal entity. So you've got to think about that as well. And as we build up these basically containers of information as we go through, it creates our design. But we must be doing this early, and we must be also taking on the journey, the business, because if we don't get the business to engage in this process early, this will delay your program, because you will not be able to sign off the configuration, and you will find things later on in the program that you hadn't considered properly or fully. And then we have the final one, which is a retail product catalog, and that's very much, you know, the two versions of the one which comes through your door, and you're able to do a little bit of extra stuff, and then the one that you might well have online. And there's extra functionality that brings, such as you can add different attributing, you can have different images if you wanted to, but it is another piece of that entire puzzle that we have. So just moving on to then the key decisions, and I just want to stop for a minute. Has the screen share dropped at all? Great, thank you. Okay, so moving on to the things that we really want to talk about then with all forms of the business. So when we sit down, we want to talk about the product ID, a really contentious area around the whole piece. How many countries are in scope? Does the client have any own brand product, i.e. do they make them themselves? What is the shipping to other countries? How many barcodes does a product have, especially in a global scenario where we may be selling the product in multiple countries? Are the products, so seasonality is a big thing for retail. Is a product dual sourced? A major concern now in general retailers is about safeguarding and de-risking the supply chain. What are the product dimensions? Now, this is a really, we'll spend some time on this, but so the 4 standard dimensions is style, color, and configuration, but we've got a brand new one called version now. That's up on docs, so if you're not familiar with it, go and have a read. But it's part of a general process that Microsoft are bringing along around product engineering. How does VAT work for the product? So we know that VAT in the UK has some differences in and around children clothing, for example. But what about that in this country and beyond? Are there kitting requirements? So these are all the things you've got to think about when we sit down in the design phase, but ideally you have prepped the business, maybe in the pre-sales phase, for these kind of important decisions. So let's take the first one, the product ID. So what's best practice? Well, numbering sequences are the ones. All right. So we don't want to do manual things, really. We want to be doing numbering sequences. The whole point of a number sequence is that we ensure the quality of the data as well as time saving. It also affords a really good thing about our reporting, and that's one of our major considerations in this zone. We have legacy systems we will be migrating from, and we may still have to talk to those legacy systems via integrations. So if we define a new product ID, with 15 characters, because we've started off with a legal entity, some numbers and things like that, these systems might just not be able to handle that level of data. So we have to do an evaluation across all systems that will consume the product data, and make sure that they would all actually be able to handle the product ID if we move to a new one. And often most clients do want to move to a new one because they've got a lot of legacy data that's not right or bad. But sometimes you do have to do a halfway house. So for example, all products in flight at the moment would migrate with their current numbers. All new products for the next season potentially would run the number sequence. And then reporting, obviously that gives us a baseline against reporting. Now, Nomenclature, there is a place for this in this discussion, but it's not the primary. The primary one is making sure that the ID of the product is accurate. How many countries in scope? Well, we have a lot. We are a multinational product, so, and retailers are trying to spread out across the globe. So there is a wider legal entity discussion that needs to happen generally inside the program, and that's normally driven in the finance stream or enterprise structures. And we have to be cognizant of what is happening in that stream. We have to feed into it, because if suddenly we have, for example, a legal entity decision where, let's give the example of this retailer has an operation in America, and so we set up a legal entity for America. Now they also have a scenario where they deal in Canada, but it's a very small scenario. So basically they have one warehouse and they sell out of it, but they don't purchase out of it. And the business doesn't feel that the effort to have a legal entity for Canada is worth the impact to their operation. That's great. Okay, so that's a decision that you would go through and you agree. The problem we have now is that we have a release product which is set up for America, but it also needs to understand any regulatory scenarios, barcoding scenarios for another country. And how do we actually handle that, and how do we make that separation? So being close to the rest of the streams in this one is very important. Is it own brand? If the client actually has their own products they're selling, do we take on all of that beautiful planning, versioning, project engineering piece, trialing that happens inside that organization? Well, the answer, in my opinion, is really no. We wait until the company has decided on what those products are and what they're going to be. At the moment, and I'll say at the moment, Dynamics doesn't really hold that capability. It'd be great if it does, and I'm sure that the engineering team are busy beavering away. But there are things like product fact sheets that we will now have to have, especially if it's own brand, because we are the controller of the quality of that product. We have to understand a gold standard version when we're doing QAing. There are often higher QA standards than, say, maybe selling if you are just a retailer selling a Dyson fan, for example. You definitely have higher quality standards you have to hold your own products to, and therefore we have to understand more about that product in our system than we would do for somebody else's. So therefore attributes will be higher. Shipping to other countries. So it's very natural that in the UK we might have a website, we might have a retail store where people or a call center, and I might want it to deliver to another country, maybe France, for example. So therefore, do any of the products you have logos or designs on them? Is a product that we've created not actually able to enter another country, either for a banned country from the government, the United Kingdom, or is it actually maybe inflammatory to another society or country of that product? And so therefore we have to understand that when we come to setting up a product, and we have to inform the clients how they can actually manage that scenario within the product as well. Could any of the products be considered dual use? So people may or may not be aware about some functionality called dual use that is in the product, or very closely to be in the product now. You'll find it on docs. It's actually a feature that's under flighting. But if I was selling fertilizer, or maybe a chemical for fertilizer, then one country may well think that that is classed as a dangerous, almost military grade material, whereas another country may still class it as farming. So therefore I have to understand that these two countries classified this product differently, and I will have to run to different certification requirements. This feature will provide that, which is great news. Make sure we try and stick to standard here. This area is complicated enough. Often there's a team inside the client that manages it. Listen to that team, engage that team in the discussions. Don't just leave them to the one side, because they will throw requirements at you that may break your design later. Barcoding. So if I'm buying a product from someone else and selling it, they've probably got a barcode on it. So I want to ingest that barcode and use that barcode through my system. However, you know, if I am someone who actually relabels every product I buy because I want to use my in-house barcoding, because maybe I want to stop people doing comparison searches, or simply it is more efficient from an operation perspective that I run a certain barcoding number that I can control, we have to understand that. Now, the barcode table itself is a really interesting table. I've seen lots of people try to customize values onto this table, which is fine when there's only one barcode for one variant. When you suddenly blast that out into the fact I've got EAN, UPC, and various others, it becomes a lot more difficult to control. So understanding the barcodes in the barcode types in scope, and then the usage cases for each of those, is going to help you really early. So are the products seasonal? So in retail, and I don't think, even though I have worked with fashion retailers and other retailers before, I still think seasonality is a part of all retailing, if I'm honest. And we have seasonality within inside the product. The only problem around seasonality is that we see it as one value, and it's not one value, because there is a financial season that the business will run to, which is very straightforward, and it normally runs to their financial year, but can sometimes be different. And then we have the seasons that the actual shoppers understand. So autumn, winter, spring, summer, which may actually have completely different dates. And what we need to understand is when we create a transaction, of course, we understand the date of that transaction, which satisfies our financial season scenario. But it doesn't necessarily satisfy our retailing season scenario. So we have a season field on the product master at the moment, which allows us to set a value. However, it only allows us to set one value, and when it's valid to and from. But the reality is, as by the little diagram here, we're going to create a product in advance of a season. So I'm going to create a product maybe 6 to 8 months in advance of a season that I'm going to sell it in. I'm then going to sell it in that season, and ideally it's sold all the way through that season, and I have no stock left. However, if I do have stock left at the end of that season, I might have one of three things. I either write it all off and try and end of life it through various means, or I could turn it into a continuity item, which means seasonality from there on for that product holds little value, because it would be a year-round sale. So I'll come on to one of the things that we do around this area from a modification point, but it's definitely understanding the seasons and the cycles different to the financial seasons within inside the organization. That planning for the product is an important step. Dual sourcing, we can't really do it in the product at the moment to any a sophisticated manner. So what do we mean by dual sourcing first? I think that's worthwhile sitting down with your client and making sure, because we have options. So alternative products we can substitute, alternative suppliers, we can just switch them to another one. But being able to split a purchase, a demand, for example, so 60% goes on to supplier A and 40% goes on to supplier B, we don't really have a great answer for that at the moment. Of course, you can look to Power BI to generate the POs, but based off of the demand, or you can actually not have a supplier in the product defined, and instead only have approved suppliers. And then when you get the planned demand back from, say, Planning Optimizer or MRP, you can make a selection of the supplier with the filter of approved suppliers. Now that gives us some way, but it doesn't really give us a 40%, 60% scenario I was talking about. So we still have to do a lot of this off system in order to understand how we're going to generate those POs. But I'll talk about the customization options around that in a bit as well. So product dimensions, then, probably the one everybody might have thought this would be focused around, and it is a major consideration area. So I approach product dimensions from a solution design perspective as trying to standardize, if possible, across the entire product set. Now that's quite difficult sometimes, but I have managed to pull it off in two retailers who have, their 1.5 million SKUs kind of thing. And I think it's really important we ask ourselves some key questions when we're making these decisions with them. So how many unique SKUs do you actually have? If you only have a couple of hundred, and the future plans of the business are not to drastically change, well, you've got a decision to make there of why would you not just go for defined product mass, for a defined product for each one of those SKUs? Because the number is not large. You get to leverage all of the information held at a product level, which is more than at a variant level. So, that has to come under a serious consideration. Of course, if you have hundreds of thousands of products, that becomes a little less likely, because not only are you going to burn the product IDs, but you're losing out some of the goodness and the reasons why we have product masters. Do we have edge case products that need a bespoke solution? So I'll give you an example here of probably the worst thing you'll ever have to deal with if you do retail, and that's lingerie. For example, a standard bra will have 107 sizes per color or style. So, for example, another example of the retailer we're dealing with, they were selling CK bras in a multiple of colors, so let's say 10. So that's 1,070 SKUs. That is a lot of information for anybody to not only order, but also for us to make sure that we handle correctly within inside the system. So really have a think about those products and try and identify those edge case ones, because there may be other ways of doing it. Do you have lots of colors? Are you working for a retailer who understands a color as a selling tool? So, for example, is a color classified as ocean spray? It means nothing to anybody bar the people who have made that color up as part of that color palette, but that is the key name that they want to portray for a color. So that proves us that provides us some challenge, because obviously we want to be using for color some blacks, blues, light blues, dark blues, those kind of things. But I'll talk about that in a bit. But have a really good think about color and how, if you have lots of color, and how you're going to maintain the quality of data across that process. The same can be said for size. So, for example, trousers is a great example of size and length. Now, I've seen style used in this area for that as well. But do you just make a size called 32-32? You know, how does that work for across the business? Are you going to accidentally get people choosing 32-32 when they meant just for shorts, which are just A32? How can you make sure that doesn't happen? Size groups are the answer for that, but how can they be effective if your hierarchy, for example, doesn't allow you to use those effectively? So have a real think about the amount of sizes and if you can rationalize the sizes at all across the different products. Then if we've got a style, is style really needed? It's an option that we have. You know, for a t-shirt, you could have long sleeve, short sleeves. And I've seen absolutely people have that as a style. But actually, the manufacturing costs of those two items are wildly different. The QAing of those will be different. The design pattern you have to give to the manufacturer will be different. Why could you not make them different products? It is just a challenge that you can have to justify if style is going to be needed or not. Cost price is an interesting one about how pricing is handled, because we've got to really consider cost pricing when we worry about how are we going to do our product dimensions, because it is very much the case that different products of different colors cost different things to actually manufacture. So if I am own branding again, so if I have a jumper that's made with a gold fabric compared to a red fabric, the gold one will be more expensive and therefore will have a higher cost price. Have I made sure that I can manage my costs at the color level, for example? And what overhead does that bring to the rest of the scenario? Language. So that's a really interesting one. So if we think about the languages of size, and we know full well that we have European sizes, US sizes, UK sizes, colors is a bit more easy because it's a simple translation, but sizing is harder. We don't want to have lots and lots of things in our size table. So because at the end of the day, the people who are actually doing this work are going to pick the wrong thing. So do you, from global selling perspective, go, this is the default size for my organization, no matter where I sell it. So for example, if I sell in the States, the product variant that is released into the US market will still be UK size 8, but I will just translate that into American size 14, for example. I don't actually know what that size is, but do I just use translation? Because that would take care of the pause. It won't take care of integration, but I can maybe work something around integration. How do I go about handling that difference in sizes between countries? So what about VAT, or tax for that matter? So in the UK, we have a break on children's clothing. So it's quite regular to see that I'd have one product master potentially for a jacket that comes in children's sizes, and I'd have another product master for a jacket that comes, the same jacket that comes in the adult sizes, or after the age of 13, which I think is where the break occurs. Now that's fine, but obviously, ideally, that's still children's wear, and we're not really getting the greatest understanding of the selling performance of that product if we've had to split it because of VAT. So I'll talk about a modification we do, but that's a really important thinking point through this process. But the other one is, and it's only actually come up recently for me, is if I've got a standalone product, but I sell it as part of a service, it's actually going to come under a different VAT scenario. And that isn't covered by kitting. It's actually a bundled service. So how do I equate then when I sell that line as part of that service that I can change the tax value from, say, 20% to 5%? So that's so having the real key is to uncover all of these little differences inside the organization that you're implementing for, so you can raise them up and have a discussion about them, because something like that will, if it comes through at maybe UAT or end-to-end test design or something like that, it's really going to put a problem in the middle of your implementation, because it probably will mean you'll have to go and do something retrospective with the code base. Is there any kits? So standard functionality is all about sellable kits. But what about the other options? Discover if they do anything clever with their buying of product to reclassify it. So do they buy in product and sell that product, but also then take a percentage of that product, send it to a supplier to then be put into maybe a packet, which then comes back as a different sellable product? You know, discover what they are, understand how we're going to handle that PO scenario. How are we going to make sure that the POs created handle the demand for not only the sale, but also for the kit expectation? It's very prevalent in a B2B scenario or wholesaling piece. Send straight to the supplier, receive to sell. So I'm going to buy stuff which will go straight to the supplier. They are going to do some stuff to it, and I am going to receive something else. So do I make 2 purchase orders? You know, how do I handle this piece? You know, where is that product's journey, and where, you know, what on that product is my cost scenario going to prove it to? Because as soon as it lands in this country, I'm going to have to pay duty because it's going to the other supplier. They're going to do some work. I need to add more cost onto that product's cost, and then it's going to come back to me. So how am I managing that cost cycle around that product as well? So that's a couple of things to think about. And I'm just going to go on to the customizations you could expect to have to do as part of a retail project. So first one is the catalog hierarchies. So if you've been lucky enough for your organization that you're working for to agree to a nice structured product type driven hierarchy, then you've got a chance of using the standard piece. If you haven't, we still need to understand some defaulting, because the reality is product creation in Dynamics has a number of steps. And while we do have the product checker for retail, there are some things it does not check. So we want as much defaulted scenario as we can. Now we can get this through product templates, which are great. But if once again you're in a department store world, you're going to have 300-400 product templates, so it becomes unmanageable. So we look to default, if possible, from the hierarchy if it's suitable to do so. Product lifecycle status, great little feature, really useful. Unfortunately, it doesn't really go far enough. And I suppose what I'm talking about here is if I put, so if, let's just say I have a couple of statuses: new, current, discontinued, and then end of life. Really, when I switch from current to discontinued, I would love for my default order settings to stop that from purchasing. Instead, I have to remember to go off and set those values. So why not have a little bit of customization that when I change that, it goes and set this as a default order settings to basically stop for purchase. Now, I could do this now, you know, before that was just pure code. I actually could do this now via the use of the CDS, or DataFlex Pro, as it will be termed, because I would have sunk that information out potentially, and I can have a trigger in DataFlex Pro, which will allow me then to go off and write back that setting change. So all of these now don't have to necessarily be code, but they are little enhancements you can do to ensure the quality and the operational process is maintained. Season and segments. So I suppose one of my personal bugbears. So if I just click this a second. So you can't see the season table. There is no menu option for the season table. You have to kind of bring it up. It's a bit annoying. But so let's see the season table. Just create the menu item. When you have a lot of seasons and you've been in operation for a while, that drop-down list is going to be very big. So let's add a flag to hide some values, so that the user doesn't see all these values and can make the wrong selection. Seasons linked to a group of countries. Now, autumn winter in the UK is spring summer in Australia. How are we managing that? How are we making sure that we are selecting the right season within the same, because they would both have the same date ranges potentially. Oh, sorry. So they would both have the same date ranges potentially, which would be a problem. So let's sort that bit out and actually group a season by some countries, so that we can make sure that we maintain that data quality again. Because at the end of the day, it's all about maintaining the data quality. Seasonality needs to be defined, i.e. winter. So a season could be autumn, summer, or maybe A, B, C, D, E. But actually, I need to know that that date range was for winter, and this date range was for autumn. So I need a little bit more information. Now, of course, I could do that through reporting, but I still need a lookup table for that data. So where am I getting that? I could base that on the CDS now, absolutely, and that would really help because it lowers the impact of the code in the core system, but it needs to be done somewhere. Provide a structured way to change the value. Reclassification of a season is a major financial impact. It has to be controlled in most retailing businesses because you are moving budget information, you're affecting the stock holding, various bits and pieces. So how do we maintain that? How do we put some level of workflow around it? Well, before we would have to build that. CDS now gives us that approach, if I'm honest, so we can provide a structured way of working around the CDS for that. What about variants? So if I've got a product that, let's just say a green top, I bring that on and I'm using color as a variant, and I bring that on last year. This year I bring on a blue top because it did really well, but I'm just going to run it for a season. Seasonality is not at the variant level. How do I understand seasonality at a variant level? Well, the reality is I have to drop it. I have to drop that lookup down one level. And I don't really think you can get away from that one, even with the use of CDS at the moment. So the next one's color and color groups. So one of the big things that we see around here is all around the color group piece, and often color group and size and color, they just don't give us enough. So in the example where I have Seaside View or Ocean Spray as a color, the reality is I probably got thousands of those colors, and it's likely that the people maintaining those colors have another segmentation of light blue, mid blue, dark blue, and that could well be the swatch color. So what I need to do really is put another collection above that color group to indicate blue or white. And there's two reasons for that. Sometimes the reason is either website integration to a third-party website, or it's a reporting requirement because they want to slice and dice it by a certain color. Size collection is exactly the same thing. So when I have a multi-product retailer over lots of different things, there is a good chance that my size groups will not cut the mustard in the way I would normally perceive it, because the number of sizes I would have would just be so large for that group. So having another level above size group provides me with the extra granularity I need to make the user's job easier in that selection. So the other one, VAT. So VAT is really interesting. So I've talked about VAT. So for me, in a number of cases, we've dropped VAT down into the variant. It's a very low modification. The key thing is that the purchase order is it gets a little bit of code to trigger a look at the variant value as well as the product master value, as it normally does, and just overwrite if needed. Because at the end of the day, the purchase order is the king at that point there. We're just defaulting in from the other sources. From a selling perspective, we've got to do a little bit more work to make sure that we pass that value correctly up into the channels that we need to. Commodity codes is exactly the same thing. So if we are selling to multiple places and we need to hold more than one commodity code, then let's drop that down onto the variant. We also have a scenario where variants may well be crossing commodity codes. So in the case of having cosmetics or maybe liquids, different sizes in liquids sometimes cross commodity codes. And so therefore that's a consideration. So once again, you have to talk that one through with the business. Trade agreement reasons. So this is another really interesting one. So trade agreements in retail, of course, we change prices. That's absolutely fine. But we never really understand what the original price was outside of maybe it being the first record that was created. But often that isn't actually the original price because there was a mistake, and we don't like updating trade agreements. We like to create new ones and end the old ones. So having another reason code on a trade agreement makes a lot of sense in retail to capture these information so we can understand when was the original price, when was permanent markdown, and when was some temporary markdown. We can probably do some clever work to understand how this all works, but that puts a massive burden on your reporting stream to actually get those answers, where this little drop down really does solve that whole piece and make the delivery of that stream significantly easier. And then vendor certificates. So vendor certificates are very good, very useful. So if you have so European timber regulations, which will be associated to a product, very important things that they're in date. The trouble with vendor certificates is it's not an entity today. You can't get to that data on CDS. It doesn't have a business event on it, so you can't tell if a certificate has expired and trigger any action. So that's the key for us. Get it exposed, get it in the CDS, have something that just checks if a vendor has expired or not. So therefore you can really sort yourself out. And dual sourcing, brand new. Dual sourcing is not brand new. It's something that's been around for ages. The reality is what is brand new is Planning Optimizer. And there is a possibility that we will be able to extend Planning Optimizer. This for me is where you would do the dual sourcing. We would take an input from the business about how they would like to safeguard their ordering across certain manufacturers. We would put that as an input into the demand planning of Planning Optimizer, along with the demand of the products, and that would spit out then the planned orders with the correct vendors associated. Right, so yeah, that's me talking for a little while. So it's 2:45. So I'll stop there and open for any questions. Okay, I can see I've got one in the chat at the moment. I come from a CE background. Is it possible to sync products from D365 Commerce to D365 Sales and Service? Yeah, dual write is your key for that. So obviously, dual write is the mechanism of us moving data in and out of F&O to the CDS, soon to be rebranded DataFlex Pro. So yes, you can get products out into that. And it can support hopefully whatever you need to do in sales and service. it is a recognized channel, so there shouldn't be any problems for you in that. Siva, I think you got your hand up.
Hi, Neil.
Hi, mate.
Okay. I have a couple of questions actually. It's around the price management.
Yes, we got these from you on your submission. I think we're going to cover them off a bit later.
Oh, okay. Cheers. Thanks. Okay, cool.
In the Q&A session this afternoon, we'll cover those off for you.
Ah, thanks. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, Noel. Apology, I had a little bit of disconnectivity due to the power failure, which is unusual, but I'm back on. And, I also missed some part of your session, so definitely recording is to help me out. And for everyone to know, we are recording these sessions and it will be future reference. Got like some bit of time here, so does anyone have any question or no?
No worries. Well, I'll just add that I think one of the biggest disruptors that we've had generally as we go through these programs is the data quality piece from the clients and the sheer number of data points that you have to set in the product really to support it accurately, especially when you come to catalogues and the whole workflow piece around that. One of the things we have done in the multiple partners I've worked now is create a wizard. Now, we used to have to create that in code. I think DataFlex Pro CDS gives us a great opportunity to have that as a model-driven app, because we have all the data points in CDS. We can even have the custom entities as needed. So having that guided process with the logic, I think is really is the next good step in and around the product. But I would just really stress that you need to get finance, merchandising, operations, procurement all in a room when you talk about the product design, because if you don't, you are going to miss a viewpoint, and you are going to get someone coming from left field and unfortunately torpedoing you.
That's a good information, Neil. Thank you for sharing that. As Neil mentioned, we still have a Q&A session where we can kind of open the channel up and everyone can ask their questions in detail. Also, we have a list of questions already been submitted by a number of attendees, so we will be highlighting those ones first, and then okay, Ravinder saying great and very informative session, Neil. Thank you, Neil. Ravinder. Great. If you don't have any question, I can give maybe 10 minutes break to everyone. And thanks, Siva. I'll increase the volume, so let me know if that solves the problem. Is that okay now? Great. So let's have a 10-minute break before we start our next session. The next session is on powerful document generation for dynamics in retail. Before I describe that, I'd like to thank you, Neill, for your great session, and also we're looking forward to have you in Q&A panelist as well. So that would be great to maybe get more knowledge out of you.
Yeah, no problems. Happy to do it.